Good morning, neighbors. So I turned the camera on, didn't write any notes down. I had about 3 things to dump out this morning, and they disappeared when I hit record. Isn't that the way of life? So, what have I got to rant about this morning? Okay, here's a really tough one that is tough. Um, software. Software development. Software development methodologies. My first introduction to a corporate attempt to turn software development into a hard defined process was the application of something called Jordan structured analysis. So if you go back in engineering times, Jordan is a very old technique. It's still buried in a lot of newer techniques because that's what we do is we build on things to improve them. But it was kind of detailed engineering process to step through and evaluate that you have evaluated everything you should evaluate, if that makes sense. And what happened during that implementation of Jordan, and again, this was one of the industry's original standards. I talked about CMM in another video, Capability Maturity Model, which is one of the most developed processes for software writers to follow. And it's used in very large systems. I'm talking about systems that are deployed across countries. In Y2K, my job in Y2K basically was to find 4-bit and 8-bit controllers out there that would have a problem with a date rollover and decide if we could live with it. So for a single device, I might write or recommend a piece of code be written to fix it. That little piece of code for these devices is a BIOS update. So you might have to go put new EPROMs into that device. Now, I'm programming for one device, but I've got 400 of them in 7 different sites across the country, and I've got to get this update into all 400 of them. So now I need a contact list. I need a site list. I need to know how they do their updates, or they need to, because they need to give me a schedule date. This is going to be done, period. No choices. If they don't do that, I've got 3 other things that little piece of software might use that I'm trying to coordinate. And I'm trying not to shut down some other facility somewhere for some silly reason. If that device was on a hard interlock that forced, massive shutdowns, it was more critical to get done than other devices out there. So a simple thermocouple scanner that's looking at 256 thermocouples across reactors, and I've got these things deployed at a few sites out there. I've got to update them. They're not really process critical. If everything goes right, you can do one of these firmware upgrades in a matter of 5 or 10 minutes and get a piece of equipment online. So do you negotiate doing this during real-time operations? Do you have backup measurements that can cover you for a 15-minute outage that might turn into a 2-hour outage because shit happens? So you go through these, you go through the risks and stuff, and you might do this just in your own head because there's no dependencies out there. You're by yourself, or you might be coordinating with an organization that is working across the globe. And again, hard evaluations as to how critical that decision is into a business, how critical that business is to the life around it. So if I do X, can Y happen? Do I even know Y could happen if I did X? So you dig and you scrounge and you read papers, and you read other engineering papers from the design house that put something together, and their design house, their controls house, that was another contractor that wrote software that had to follow standards. So you go through these processes. It's painful and time consuming, and managers are wondering why you're over budget and under time, and you're trying to guide a dozen minds writing software in half a dozen places for 40 places that each might have a unique application. So you sent out questionnaires that half the engineers ignored because you pissed them off sometime before. So you follow up. So years, that Y2K thing was a part of my career for years, but it wasn't a primary up until it got critical. But for 2 years, we were taking notes and writing papers and talking to each other, and nothing shut down for Y2K. That fact is pretty impressive considering what all us little geeks in the back rooms were doing, watching sports balls. So the Boeing plane crash, to me, from my perspective, was a failure in software release methodology. You had untrained people with software deployed that they had no idea of, and they might have died for it. So other pilots knew about that software. The training requirements were broken because of other considerations that had nothing to do with what that pitot tube, what we know about it, and what the software does. You force decisions out, maybe not under the best circumstances. And shit does happen, and I've got shit examples too. So these videos are a view into a mind and jobs that just a few people don't get access to. They're that strange guy that walked by. You saw him 2 years ago, and you see him again, and he's in your facility for a day or a week or a month. And he doesn't work directly with you, but you see him working with engineers or electricians, and 6 months later, you're a seagull. You're in another plant, or you're in the same plant, and you meet people. You talk to people. So, because these are the folks that you're trying to protect if you make a software decision that's silly. So, yes, there's always a place for silly. So, kind of long ramble into just an intro. So, this thing I've talked about, CMM, capital CMM, that process has grown over the years. One of the things that I helped create. So if you are a CMM user and you see a -I after your project, that is a new CMM model that was developed to help define in contracts what software houses had to deliver and how they had to deliver it. In our contracts, it was a contractual requirement that whoever doing business with us followed the CMMI rules. And as soon as you did that, as soon as you put that in the contract, you have added staff and overhead onto a job. If that organization doesn't have that staff and overhead already in place, it is expensive to build that knowledge and to put it into all the practices of your business. So one of my jobs was supervising business manager and delivery manager for 40 developers that were part of the full team that we worked with. Was somewhere at a few hundred developers working on the same systems in different aspects. So yes, you coordinate these activities. You have to look at interaction. So a financial database expert and database transition expert and someone that knows the state they're working in, state tax laws and federal tax laws. Now, he's a software developer, but he has to be able to touch on those elements because in that process is requirements gathering, our signatures to what the requirements are, and everybody approves those. And a week later, the software developers who already started, but they're waiting for harder definitions, might begin to put code down on paper, or they might go and start finding the libraries that are already developed to reuse. So these library components is somewhere I worked a lot in, and this is, machine code. It's assembler code in Fortran libraries. So if I have a new I/O device out there, I've got to write a driver for it to get the data from the device into computer memory. I've got to know the timing of those memory transfers if other code has to synchronize with the bits that I just took in. So if you think I can make this easy, give me about 2 years of your time, and we'll get there. So hey, another coffee ramble, because people do shit. This is just a fact of life. I will avoid personal because business, corporations are driving personal, and we kind of need to change that up so the community is around to help with the personal stuff and not corporations. My thoughts, 2 cents. Corporations don't own our healthcare. That executive sitting in a tower somewhere owns your healthcare. He is making decisions for your health. And that's not community. That's not family. No matter how well they play in your neighborhood and how much money they give away, it's business. And it's a tax write-off. I don't have any.